Okay, so now we're going to try and do a kind of analysis of that speech to see what sort of things would have to be included in any rendition and what sort of things are optional that will stand you in good stead and will be to your credit if you manage to put them in, but aren't absolutely essential to the speech itself. As you probably noticed, the speech was slightly on the long side. You won't come across anything that is longer than that. I think it's over 7 minutes. But what I wanted to do now is go through it bit by bit. And I've done this with the help of a kind of graph that you can see in your screen, in which I've divided the speech up into different parts, into 4 columns. We've got the left-hand column, which gives us the links. The links being those so important parts of the speech which tell you how you're getting from one part to the next. You'll see that there are not that many links in this speech, and that's because basically it's a linear speech. It starts at A and goes straight down the line to B. There are other speeches which are more complicated in terms of structure. But even so, the links that are there need to be made very clear in your rendition, in your notes. Even the fact that there's no link is sometimes very helpful. You'll see that there are a couple of lines where a link may have been put in. There's no link, there's just a line. That in itself tells you quite a lot. It means that you're just continuing in the same line of argument, that there hasn't been any change in the way in which the speaker is trying to explain things. He's just carrying on developing an idea that has already been stated. So that's what we have in the left-hand column. Then we have the second column, which is the main column. Now, this is what you might call the bare bones approach to the speech. In other words, these are the key parts of the speech which would enable the speech to hang together as a structured and logical whole, even if you didn't have any of the detail. So as you can see here, you would need to start by talking about the fact that there was somebody called Boudica who was a soldier 2,000 years ago and was very famous. Then you'd need to move on to explain that the government, surprisingly, has decided not to allow women to fight in the front line. Then we move on to explain what we mean by front line. And then we have the reasons. On the left-hand column there, you'll see the link BC for because. In the speech, of course, this was rendered with why has the decision been taken? Well, there are a number of reasons. And then we outline those different reasons. The fact that women are not physically strong enough, the tank and the toilet argument. You can never account for anybody's tastes, but I think most women would agree that it's not an awful lot of fun going to the toilet surrounded by a lot of men. And then the third one, the risk, the experiment factor. That concludes the part that explains the British government position. And it's quite important for you to keep in mind that that has to be made clear, that this is not the speaker's point of view, this is the argument that is being given by the British government, all that part up to there. But now we move on and we look to the situation in other countries. We look at what's happening in certain Scandinavian countries, where they have a much more open policy. But then we say, as you can see with the link, but what's the reality in those countries? The reality is that women don't serve in hand-to-hand combat situations in those countries either. And then we move on to the next part of the argument, which is that even though these countries have higher or have a more open policy towards allowing women into the army, it doesn't encourage them into the army. More women serve in the armed forces in the UK and in the US than in Denmark and Norway. That's part of the key structure. And then we move on to the conclusion and whether you want to avail yourself of your rights as a woman to fight in hand-to-hand combat situations. Don't get me wrong, the main section there is not sufficient to pass, but you can't miss any of it out. That has to be in your speech. With that, the speech makes a logical, coherent whole. What you would need in order to be able to pass is to add something from the next two columns, where we have nicely color-coded here in the third column, where we call the secondary details. We have everything nicely coloured in green. Again, you can see which parts of the speech are secondary to the main structure, but which still include important pieces of information. For example, things like when Boudica was fighting, the fact that the government took this decision after a review, and the difference between serving in the front line as an artillery member or as a fighter pilot, and on the other hand fighting in hand-to-hand combat. You can see, going through the second column there, that there's a lot of information there which is important and which should not be missed out. You can miss some of it out. That's quite normal in stressful situations, that you may not remember something, or you may omit to say it even if it's in your notes. But most of what's in the secondary column there, we would expect to find also in the consecutive interpretation as well. I won't go through all the different things that are in there. I think most of it is explanatory. Towards the end, for example, you would be expected to at least have an attempt at trying to understand and transmit some of the humour, if indeed you think it was funny in the first place. But then again, that's not really relevant either. It's not whether you think it's funny, it's whether the speaker thinks he's funny. And in this case, I thought I was. So you have to try and make it funny too. And then finally, in the last column, the red column, we have all the detail. Now these are the sort of things that can be omitted, but which you should do your level best, of course, not to, because these are the things which give the colour to the speech, and these are the sort of things which enable you to give free rein to your ability as an interpreter to come up with nice expressions in your own language. So for example, you'll see in the first box there in the last column, I've written adjectives. So there you would want to find a nice equivalent in your own language for things like ferocious, for iconic status. You've got to try and find ways of making this sound good in your own language. If it's not there, it's not going to be crucial to the understanding of the speech, but it is going to make a big difference to the impression that you give as an interpreter. Many of the things that you will see in this final column are figures. Does it really matter if you forget to say that the government review was 4 years in the making? Not really. Does it really matter if you can't remember the precise figure, 30% of jobs being closed to women in the armed forces? Not really, as long as you understand that a large number of places are closed to them. Does it matter if you don't mention the upper body, and so on and so on? It doesn't matter that much. But it wouldn't go down very well if you omitted all these details. Now, of course, in a test situation, you're unlikely to have things as clear-cut in your rendition as I've made it here. You're hopefully going to get all the main points, but you may find that you miss out some of the points that I put under secondary and included a lot of the points I've included under detail. The jury's responsibility is to try and work out at the end of the day what the overall balance is. I can't tell you that if you say everything that's in main plus 75% of what's in secondary, for example, that yes, you will pass. Because it may be that you get all of the main, say 60% of the secondary, but 80% of the detail, and that somehow combining together makes for a good overall impression. But what I do hope that this will enable you to see a little bit more clearly is how to prioritize and categorize information. If you're under pressure when you're taking notes, what's the most important information to get down? And here you have quite a clear indication of that. First of all, you get the main idea down, then you do your level best to get the secondary idea down, and if you're really going swimmingly well, then you'll hopefully get a lot of the detail down as well. So there we have it. That's the rough analysis of the speech that you've just heard to give you some idea of what sort of standard you'd have to reach in order to make that a pass in a test situation. As I say, you may get some speeches which are more difficult than this, but I'm pretty sure you won't get any speeches which are any longer. So if you can manage with a speech like this, at this length, then you're doing okay. And good luck.